that family knows, obviously, if you listen to that letter being read, that family knows that the Adelsons were the ones involved. Charlie Adelson was right behind this. I mean, he's all in it.
Welcome to a special edition of Surviving the Survivor. The Dan Markel murder with Karm on Crime.
So, Karm, anyone following the Dan Markel murder case ever since he was shot and killed in his driveway in Tallahassee back in 2014 was sort of looking forward to this day when Charlie Adelson appeared in a Tallahassee courtroom, and the bottom line is he was denied his pre-trial release. Now, you, by trade, are a therapist, a social worker. Putting all legal aspects aside, how do you think Charlie looked today in court?
First of all, I would have to get a magnifying glass to see him on my phone. It was a very tiny picture, but he did not look at anybody. He kind of looked like into himself. And I think I had the feeling that he was still cocky. I don't know why.
Last time I saw him, he had a bushy head of hair. Some people call that in our world a Jufro, but he did not have that. He had a jail haircut, and he looked incredibly pale today as compared to normal. But without any further ado, why waste time on us when we've got an amazing legal panel led off today by Terri Austin, new to Surviving the Survivor. She is currently a host and legal analyst at the Law and Crime Network, and her credentials go on for pages and pages, but I'll tell you, she is a Columbia Law School grad. That's all you need to know, and a very adept attorney. Judy Tseng joins us as well with the Asian American legal focus, and the other guy there in the red shirt is actually, believe it or not, this guy's got his priorities straight. He's on a tennis court. The guy's a tennis addict. He needs no introduction. He is a Mentour Lawyer. I will not butcher your last name, James, but he's allowed to play tennis after an Arthur hearing because he's got a gazillion more subscribers and has been following this case inside and out for years and years. So welcome to one and all. And since Terri is a first-timer on the show, Terri, I'll ask you the same question. Aside from the legal shenanigans that went on today, what do you think of Charlie's appearance in court?
Well, he was somewhat subdued, I would say. I think he recognizes the fact that he is in deep trouble. He is being accused of heinous crimes, murder, conspiracy, all of the above. And I think he is looking at this in a very serious way. His lawyer, I will say, I thought did an excellent job arguing on his behalf. We knew, at least I did, that it wasn't going to be a winning argument. There's plenty of evidence against him. He is a flight risk. The judge made the right decision. But I do think the defense attorney did all that he could. I thought the prosecution did a great job as well. She was a little flat, but she put it all in. And I love this judge. I think the judge is basically a no-nonsense judge. So I think Adelson looked at what was going on in the courtroom. He recognized the fact that his, fate is doomed. And he sat and, like your mom rightly said, I think he recognized the fact that it's pretty much over for him.
And James, he certainly did not look as well as you look in that sunshine on that beautiful tennis court underneath that blue umbrella. His living conditions are not quite as good, and we're going to get into what his defense lawyer said about how he's living presently. But to you, what did you think? And you've seen him in person, so what did you think of how he looked today compared to times past?
Well, definitely he was pale. So if he's in isolation and spending, 23 and a half hours a day in his cell, he's not getting a lot of sunlight. So definitely look quite pale. And I actually was re-editing the video because I'm going to have the full hearing. I had a technical issue in the morning. So as I was re-editing the video with a full hearing, I took pictures, screenshots of Charles Adelson. And he actually, at the end of the hearing, was chatting and smiling with his attorney. So there's several smiling photos that I took from the end of the hearing after he's having his last communications with his lawyer. So, obviously, I think that they all understand that the evidence against Charles, direct evidence, or circumstantial evidence, whatever way you want to characterize the evidence, it is overwhelming. It is very strong. So I don't think
Judy,
he was expecting to go home, but he got a few victories. I mean, the judge was nice and said that he was going to try to make everything he could to give him some accommodation so that he can help in his defense while he's in jail.
And so, Judy, Mentor Lawyer mentioned, these smiling photos, and I saw one or two that Mentor already posted. Does that sort of fall in line with his character, you think? He's denied this pretrial release, and he's kind of got a cocky bravado about him nevertheless, right, Judy?
Yes, I think from all the evidence that we have seen about Charlie so far, he is very narcissistic. He has a huge ego. I really doubt that he's going to make any sort of deal. I think he's definitely going to be going to trial thinking that he's going to be able to talk his way out of it or have his lawyer do some fancy lawyering to get him off.
So I was reading a lot of the comments post the Arthur hearing, and it was interesting because some people said that the state, they thought, in some small little way, and this is going to interest Carmela because Carmela is very intrigued by Harvey Adelson and his potential involvement in this entire scenario. And some people were hinting at the fact that the state was, in its very small way, was starting to make a very tiny case potentially against him. And they started with this video of Charlie and his father Harvey at Matsuri at this restaurant. What did you make of that, Terri, if anything at all?
Well, I do think that that's correct. I think the state wants to get everybody involved in this case. Donna, the mother, Harvey, the father, and they did drop his name a couple of times because of that Matsuri recording. And he better look out. And if they, even after the fact, were helping him, even if they weren't involved, the mother and father, in the original scheme, they certainly have been conspiring after the fact. And Harvey has had these conversations with his son. And the conversations, in my opinion, really are conversations that could be used against both of them. And so the prosecution's doing a great job in trying to set up that next case. I think at the end of the day, they want every single person involved, not just, Garcia, not just the individuals who were actually involved with the killing, Rivera. Those two obviously have already been put away. We know clearly that, and I say McBanois, but I don't know how everybody else says it. But we know clearly that, she was involved. She was the one who put all these parties together. But the real people behind this case are the Adelsons. So I think the prosecution is not going to rest until they get each one of them, mother, father, and now, obviously, Charlie.
And so, Terri, to that point, I need to put you on the spot since this is your first appearance and hopefully not your last on Surviving the Survivor. Do you think that Wendy eventually gets indicted, Donna and Harvey? What are your take on those three and your thoughts on their impending future?
Well, I know it's taken a while because there hasn't been enough evidence against them. But I do think that is the intention of the prosecution, to get the Adelsons, because, in fact, Wendy is the linchpin here. She is the one who was married to him. She is the one who is the person who has the motive behind all of this. The mother and father perhaps have helped out because they are the mother and father. But I do think after Charlie, the next person on that list might be Wendy. To your point, it might be the father. But they don't have a lot of concrete evidence. They don't have a lot of direct evidence here. So it might be a little bit more difficult to get all three of them.
And James,
can I speak? Yeah, I was gonna say, can I talk for a second? You're gonna ask me a question because it's the last one. What's your question?
Oh, my question to you. I forgot that I was moderating this. No, some people were saying that, and Terri kind of mentioned this off the top. Some people were saying that Georgia was not her usual self today. Did you find that?
No, I thought that she was her normal self. Let me just, first of all, before I forget, I wanted to say hi to Karm. Hi, Joel.
Hi.
Hi, Terri. Hi, Judy. And I'm about to say goodbye as well because I don't want to hold Susan here waiting for tennis for too long. But I thought, this is just her delivery style. Remember, there's not a jury there. She was presenting to the judge. She's no nonsense. Judge is no nonsense. So she was just being herself. I've actually litigated against Georgia Kaplan when I had a hearing in front of her with a different judge. And that's her delivery style. But she can put on a little bit of a show. She did, I think, a little bit of a more enthusiasm in her speech in the closing arguments, and I think it came out great. And she gets a lot of credibility also from, being more subdued and not so theatric.
I agree.
But anyway, I'm gonna go to tennis, guys. Thanks you, Terri. Nice.
Hey, mentor. Before you go, who's gonna win the U.S. Open? And this is gonna come out afterwards, so you're gonna look bad if you don't get it right. Who's your pick for the winner in the U.S. Open?
Carlos Alcaraz.
Interesting. I'm going with Tiafoe. All right.
I am also.
We'll let you go. Thank you, Mentor Lawyer. Thanks for dropping in.
Thank you.
Judy, did you think she looked a little flat?
Already.
Did I think Kaplan did well?
Yeah, or look flat. Either way, whichever way you want to look at it.
Just as James just said, that's just the way she is. I've watched countless hours of her doing her direct examination, her closing, everything. I think that's just her tone, that she is very factual and methodical. So she's not a Tara Kawas who is very dramatic and can get loud and bombastic, but everybody has their own different personality.
Judy,
I don't know if you prefer that.
Yeah, I do too, actually. Especially from the state. I prefer stern, serious, and to the point. But something that shocked me, Steve Cohen, our producer extraordinaire who helps put this show together, texted me right away and he said, "Hey, did you hear they mentioned indirectly our podcast?" And I said, "What are you talking about?" About 24 minutes in, which is not accurate because we had Mentor Lawyer's interrupted stream. So roughly 30 minutes or so in, when Daniel Rashbaum was making his case, he said that recently Georgia Kaplan had appeared on a podcast. That was our podcast, Surviving the Survivor, and said that upon listening to the Dolce Vita tapes, nothing really had changed for her. She said on this podcast that she knew back in 2016 what was being said before the audio tapes were enhanced. And he was making that point to say she didn't really have any new evidence to hold him in jail and that he should be released. But
by the way, she did not, to Joel's tremendous regret, she did not name the podcast. She just said
that was the defense. She did not.
She did not. The
defense lawyer did not name the podcast.
The defense lawyer did not name the podcast. Joel would have liked. And if you watch
Surviving
the Survivor, you would have seen this.
But to the point, Terri, it's interesting. We live in a different world now. It's 2022, and knuckleheads like myself and very intelligent people like my mother and you who are very intelligent and Judy, it's not a traditional media anymore. And I was just surprised to know that the defense, that Daniel Rashbaum, is looking and watching these podcasts and YouTube channels, as I'm sure Georgia Kaplan is. Has it changed the playing field at all?
Absolutely. I think social media is far more accepted than it used to be, as opposed to traditional media, the New York Times, the Washington Post. People are getting their news, they are getting their information from podcasts, obviously from feeds on Yahoo and Instagram, et cetera. And even attorneys are making reference to it in court. And he did use that against the prosecution to say, listen, she didn't have anything new to say. And he referenced, I heard that as well. He didn't name your podcast, but he said a podcast. She admitted there was nothing new. And he argued that with the judge as though, a podcast, it's social media, but it's information, and it's information that is out there in the public domain. And it's something that they are referencing. So I absolutely believe that social media has become the venue now, the media that people are looking to for their official information and making reference to in trial, in and out of court, but definitely in court, as you heard there.
Karm, 83 years old, you still have influence. It's amazing.
What can I tell you? Especially now. Am I correct? Because I listened to it in the last hour, the recording of this Arthur hearing. Am I correct that this episode in the Japanese restaurant between Harvey and Charlie, this was a piece of evidence that Georgia introduced for the first time today?
Judy?
Yes. Yeah, I never even heard about, well, I actually had heard about some sort of recording between Harvey and Charlie shortly after the bump. But the impression I got was that, nobody could really make out what was being said. So today I was just as surprised as everybody to finally see some snippets of what was actually said between them. So definitely it doesn't look good for Harvey. He's not some innocent person who had no idea what his family members were up to.
And Judy, just for those who didn't catch it, reveal to the audience what was revealed in that Matsuri tape now. We all know about the Dolce Vita tape. We can now call this the Matsuri tape.
Well, unfortunately, I didn't write down too many notes, but he did make reference to, how come they didn't come to me first? He mentioned something like, isn't this what you talked to with Katie about? Something to that effect. He does mention Katie. So the important takeaway is that he is not acting like someone who is just totally surprised, like, oh my gosh, why is this person coming up to us and demanding $5,000? We got to go to the police. Charlie, what did you get us into? There's none of that indignant, surprise type of conversation that you would expect if Harvey were innocent, if he had no idea what Charlie was cooking up.
And Terri, to that point, there are a lot of legal armchair quarterbacks who say this is going to happen, this is going to happen, this is going to happen. But we always have to remind ourselves that we don't know what we don't know. And the state could be holding evidence like this that we were not aware of that could come out in a trial, right? Like there are still, if Georgia Cappleman sort of let this into evidence today, there could be other things that are hidden away or tucked away, correct?
Absolutely. And they've been trying to go after all of these individuals, frankly, for years. They've tapped phones. They've, gotten these recordings. And you've already mentioned the primary recordings, Dolce Vita and the Matsuri, but who knows what other recordings that might be out there in terms of capturing Charlie and the other Adelsons. We have the others in jail, the, Garcia, Rivera, McBanois, but I said this before and I'll say it again, they really want the Adelsons. And I think we will see other evidence. Obviously, as the prosecution, they're required, if there's anything inculpatory or exculpatory, they have to show the other side. So I think we will be seeing other evidence. I mean, this hearing is a mini trial. Obviously, an Arthur hearing is to determine whether or not there's bond that will be set here. But I do think that the prosecution probably has a plethora of evidence that they will be bringing out. And we heard, I think today, the defense say the prosecution has been very good at showing all of the evidence and cooperating. And actually, that was one of the other things that impressed me about what went on today, the fact that all of the parties got along extremely well. And they seemed to be very amicable, even though obviously they are on opposite sides, and a lot of respect in that courtroom. But I venture to say that the prosecution is going to reveal what evidence it has against Charlie shortly before next spring, when I think the trial might be scheduled to start.
Well, lately there have been rumors that these are like super attorneys who are Charlie's attorneys. And was this like one of the junior partners?
No, this was the main man.
This was the main man?
Daniel Rashbaum, the main ingredient.
Okay, there is...
Karm, are you saying that you were not impressed? Is that what you're implying?
I'm not impressed, but he didn't perform that. He did his duty sort of, but it's not the main event. It's a sideshow today. I thought they would send a junior person to the sideshow, but no, they sent the main person.
as a non-lawyer, I am allowed to ask dumb questions. And I was thinking this to myself. First of all, whenever a lawyer talks, if they have half a brain, I say, oh, they're right. That's a great argument because I'm, I don't know, naive. But today when I listened to Daniel Rashbaum, I said, oh, he's making good points here. You know, he could have fled the country here. He could have fled the country there. It's true that Georgia may have said this about the Dolce Vita tape. Hey, maybe this guy's not so bad. You know, like you start to get swayed. To what? This is my dumb question. And Terri, I'll ask you this because you have a long history in the legal world, longer than anyone on the panel here. So to what extent has a judge made his decision before hearing both sides in that courtroom?
First of all, that is not a dumb question. Second of all, I do think I'm probably the second oldest person in this video.
I meant your legal tenure. Your legal tenure.
Yes, my legal tenure.
I'm like, I'm off the chart. I'm off the chart.
Yes. But I do think that at the end of the day, the judge probably had his mind made up even before the arguments. I think, as your comment showed, the defense did do a decent job. I mean, when you listen to his argument, he basically said, look, the draft affidavit for the indictment against my client came out in 2016. He didn't flee. And essentially, he could have fled all of this time. And he didn't do that. So you can trust him. Plus, we'll put him on home confinement. We'll monitor him. There were so many things that he argued that made sense. And it did begin, in my mind, to sway slightly. But the judge saw all of that in the papers beforehand. And oftentimes when you have a judge who is as savvy as this judge and who is prepared as this judge, he read all of the paperwork and he had already made up his mind that, and he said, look, there's plenty of evidence. Those are the two things. You have to have the evidence, and is there a sort of flight risk or a risk to the community? The evidence is there. We've had the evidence in the other cases. The evidence is in this case. And, secondarily, he is a flight risk. He has shown that he could fly in some of the conversations. So the judge quickly made that determination. And I think the judge did already have his mind made up before they even began those arguments.
Karm, you're chomping at the bit.
No, I am. I told Joel today I'm not going to talk because I read people's comments and they say I interrupt, I am obnoxious, I am over the hill. But
some say you're okay.
Some say I'm okay. But the point is that it was very interesting to me because, Judy, if you remember in the past, we talked about this a lot, that there was a political angle of this case with the chief prosecutor in Tallahassee being a sort of a family associate.
Willie Meggs.
And the defense attorney today brought him up. If do you remember? The defense attorney said, well, Willie Meggs said there is no case here, and that's why it never happened. Even the chief prosecutor felt there was no case, and that's why it didn't happen. In other words, she used this argument. I don't know if you...
Well, Willie Meggs has been a bit of a lightning rod. What did you make of that, Judy?
Mm-hmm. Well, I thought it was interesting from what I watched that I guess everybody wanted to maintain that professional decorum. So nobody was going to flat out say that Willie Meggs was biased or, that he was totally wrong in not wanting to go out and arrest Charlie back in 2016. So, I don't know what's going on in people's minds, but maybe the judge sort of felt that way.
It was kind of, to me, it was a little bit less than honorable that he mentioned that, because we all know that the minute this prosecutor retired, the new one did not stop.
And Meggs had connections to lawyers who had connections, or politicians that had connections to the Adelson. So it was a tangled web for a while, which obviously is getting untangled now. We just had Ruth Markel on the show to speak about grandparents' rights. And at the beginning, Georgia Kappelman read a statement from the Markel family, and this is a very, very, very tiny part of it, but said that the boys are growing up without a father, and his parents, meaning Dan's parents, are in searing pain. Everyone involved must be brought to justice. Terri, a lot of times, you're the host on Law and Crime Network, and by the way, I used to work as a producer for Dan Abrams. I've known him for many years. Whatever I have thought about doing, Dan Abrams has done and been exponentially more successful.
Don't compare yourself.
I have no jealousy, no bitterness at all, but everything he touches turns to gold. Congratulations, Dan. Now I just lost my train of thought. I'm so angry inside. Sorry. So Terri, that's a whole other issue. So I need a therapist for that. It's important. There's a lot of drama. We have experts on like yourself, but at the end of the day, this is about a murder of a father, an ex-husband, but most importantly, a father and a son. How important is it for Georgia Kappelman to exact justice for this person and his family?
It's so interesting you should ask that question. When she read that part of the letter, she paused. And in my humble opinion, I think she got choked up.
I did too.
Yes. Right? I definitely thought she got choked up. You all know her much better than I do. But she paused. And in my opinion, she definitely was holding back. I don't know if she was going to break down in tears, but it's important to her to make sure that family is vindicated, to make sure that the grandparents, that the parents, the grandchildren who will, not have their father essentially. And she thinks that's important. And that is the reason she's pursuing this. She has taken this somewhat, at least it seems to me, personally, and she wants to see justice done. So it's a great question. And I definitely think that she is going to take it as far as she can to make sure that she's done what she can. Obviously, no matter how many convictions they get, they've got the 3. Will they get 3 more? Who knows? But she's going to do everything that she can to make sure that justice has been served. It won't bring them back, but it will help, at least to a certain extent, to close the chapter. Because I think that family knows, obviously, if you listen to that letter being read, that family knows that the Adelsons were the ones involved. Charlie Adelson was right behind this. He's all in it. And so that's why she's going after this. But yeah, she got a little choked up.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, Terri, because I was watching that and there was technical issues, as I mentioned earlier. And I just said to myself, yeah, maybe there's a technical glitch, because Georgia is known as a bit of a badass, if I may say that. She's tough. And all of a sudden, she stopped speaking, and it was more than like a beat pause. It was a pretty lengthy pause. And I said to myself, is she about to cry? I'm curious. Our audience is awesome. They're very engaging. They're always commenting. So audience, STS Nation, to steal a Dan Abramism, I'm now calling it STS Nation. Weigh in on this and let us know. But Karm, once again, you had your hand raised.
Well, once again, you interrupted me when I...
And let me guess, once again, you had a senior moment and forgot what you were going to ask.
Okay, forget about it.
Judy, on to you. So one of the issues here that came up again and again was wealth and the money that the Adelsons seemingly have or had. Obviously, these legal fees are starting to add up. But the point that Daniel Rashbaum was making on the one side was he had all the money in the world to go, and he didn't. And on the flip side, Kappelman was suggesting he has all the money in the world to go. So how did you feel that played out in terms of kind of pointing to the wealth and opulence of the Adelsons?
Yeah, I was surprised to hear that allegedly Charlie Adelson was making $3 million a year, because back when he was applying for disability insurance, he was saying something more like his income was about $990,000 a year. But maybe that didn't include his income from his real estate investments or whatever else. But clearly he has a ton more money and perhaps we all should have gone to dental or medical school instead of law school. But yeah, I mean, because we don't really know what was going on when he was traveling, but he was definitely traveling like crazy throughout 2016. And then for the years since then, too, he has also traveled internationally. So who knows if he was scoping out places to go to, making connections? Who knows if he was, hiding money away? It is strongly suspected that he did have a girlfriend in the Philippines, which he denied at his civil deposition. But, he clearly had connections. He knew people in these different countries. He's familiar with them. So anyway, I do feel like the judge made the right decision today that he needs to just stay in jail and he can work with his attorneys with some accommodations.
Before you forget.
Did I understand this correctly? That when he had the conversation with Harvey, or I don't know on what source, actually, that some of the money that his father said, we are depositing it for you, and I was kind of surprised, not in the Bank of America or Wells Fargo, we are depositing it for you in your safe. Did you hear that same thing, or am I dreaming this up?
By the way, that came from texts in the cloud. I don't mean the sky cloud, but the computer cloud that came from text. And Georgia made it clear that it wasn't related to evidence surrounding the case per se, but it was just to show that the Adelsons had this wealth and that cash was being stocked away. But yes, you are right. They said that they were putting it in a safe.
That $26,000, and we put it in your safe for you. Now, if you put it in your safe, that means you're not paying taxes on it, or is it okay? I just felt I felt uncomfortable. If I made $26,000, I feel I should declare it.
Terri, is there a legal strategy with that, Terri, for Georgia to bring that up?
Well, I think she brought it up because she said to the judge, look, you've got the evidence that I've presented here, but in case your discretion leads you to view this in favor of the defendant, I have this other evidence to show you, this in the cloud evidence about his financial wealth, which wasn't directly related to the case, but she wanted the judge to know he has all of this wealth. And so the fact that he put it in the safe, they're going to look from a tax purpose for where the money came from, not necessarily where it's going. So if it's income derived from his cosmetic dentistry or from the father or anyone else in that family, it'll be taxed. And the fact that they put it in a safe would not really hide it from any sort of taxes. That just is where they're going to place it at the end of the day. And so I think the main point there was, look, Judge, if you have any questions at all, I told you I could prove this case. I told you he's a flight risk. But if you have any questions about his wealth, let me tell you this, he's got even more money in safes and in other places that he's squirreling away.
I'm going to put you all on the spot. A quick answer from each of you on this one. Karm, playing devil's advocate. Let's say the judge today said you are released, you can go home. Would Charlie flee?
No, but even if he would have released him, even in that case, he would have released him with a foot thing,
ankle bracelet. Karm, you're having no fun. I wanted to know if you thought he would take off. No,
no. And police,
correct.
Definitely, there would be a way of not letting that happen.
Rashbaum's made it a point to say if he was released, we will provide 24-hour security at the home to make sure he doesn't go anywhere. The ankle monitor. But Karm, that wasn't the question. In a hypothetical world, if he was released freely like a bird, you think he would take off?
Yes.
Terri?
Absolutely. If he were released freely like a bird without a monitor, etc., he's out of here.
Judy?
Yes. Yeah, I think so. I think, why wouldn't he want to run off? I mean, being in jail has been misery.
Karm, you raised me so sheltered. I feel like he would stay, go on trial, but if it was me, I guess I would take that.
I raised you sheltered 100 years ago. You.
Another interesting issue that came up besides the money and being able to take off was the issue of witness tampering. So the Adelsons, I guess one can deduce that they play hardball, right? Look what happened to Dan. So the argument from Georgia was that you could tamper with witnesses. Terri, how did you take that? Because tampering with the witnesses can mean a lot of things. It can mean calling them and saying, please don't testify. It can mean whacking somebody. So what was meant by all that with the witness tampering?
I think she added that in for additional consideration for the judge. I don't think she meant that he would kill off witnesses, but the comments about the undercover person and other people who might be trying to extort money. I mean, those comments are pretty damaging. It was clear from those types of comments that Charlie would do almost anything to make sure that he stays free. And so I think she mentioned the witness tampering because he probably would go through great lengths to keep people from testifying. I don't know, obviously, if he would kill anybody, although there was some implication that that could happen too. And McMahon wanted to take care of things in case things went south. And so that implication is there. But I think as far as Kaplan was concerned, she was just saying, look, you want everybody to testify. You don't want people to be in fear. And there is that possibility that he could try to intimidate people and keep them from testifying.
And there's this critical part of the Dolce Vita tapes where Charlie, in so many words, says, if they had the evidence against us, we would have already gone to the airport. So, Judy, I mean, basically his own words doomed him in, at least today, for this Arthur hearing, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. And on the note of witness tampering, though, I feel like he did try to manipulate his ex-girlfriend, June. Looks like they were back together again back in fall of 2019, right around the time of the first trials for Sigfredo Garcia and Katie Magbanua. And she had received some Louis Vuitton handbags that she put on social media. And as anybody who saw June's testimony back in October of 2019, she was just very clearly trying to backpedal on whatever she had told the investigators. It was clear she was trying to lie or mislead or just kind of like brush off whatever she had said to the investigators back in 2018. And then even with Katie's last trial, Charlie had contacted June the day before he got arrested. So I bet he was also trying to kind of, if not tamper with the witness, but at least get June to feel sorry for him and again, try to manipulate her so that she didn't testify in the right way.
I used to think of Charlie. I was projecting, okay, psychologically. I used to think of Charlie as a white-collar Jewish boy who did this one thing, bad thing, okay? He did this crazy thing before his sister. We had to be the protector. Now I am beginning to think of Charlie as a guy who was into cocaine, into meeting with seedy people and shady people, and sort of standing in the two worlds equally comfortably.
Not a nice Jewish boy like
Not
me.
a nice Jewish boy like this one.
I'd be too scared to step into that world.
No, but I don't could I have your reaction to what I just said?
Oh, yes, you forgot selling steroids and insider trading.
Based on insurance fraud. What about insurance fraud too? Insurance fraud?
Yeah, I'm surprised that they haven't gotten him for insurance fraud. That civil lawsuit is still going on as if, okay, carry on. There's no fraud claim there. Very interesting. But I was.
But what Terri thinks about
Terri,
this
to Carmela's
character.
point, I mean, is this guy just an unsavory character all around?
Oh, absolutely. I think 360 degrees of unsavory. He has been involved in all kinds of horrible, crimes and civil crimes, fraud. So I think one way or another, he's going to go down. He's definitely not a good Jewish boy or a good boy in any sense of the word. I think the fact that he was someone who was held in high esteem. I mean, he reminds me a bit of the Alec Murdaugh case where someone had the world in front of them, this prominent attorney who now is involved in the deaths of perhaps his wife and son and insurance fraud. And I mean, it's one of those situations where you start down this path and you don't know where to start or where to stop. And one thing leads to another. And before you know it, you are scheming to kill someone. So he's not a good guy. And, hopefully the civil trial will come back to the forefront at some point. But, we'll see what happens in this criminal trial. But they have a lot against him, and he's not a good guy.
It is very interesting to me. But Terri, my father is a retired psychiatrist. My mother is a retired social worker. So I always wonder, because there are plenty of people out there, myself included, who've been coddled and helicopter parented to some degree and all this. And you just wonder, what was it about the Adelsons that made that slight difference that could put them, kind of take them to a different scary place? But that's, we'll have a I won't put you on the spot with that. I'll get a psychologist on. What I am interested in, Karm.
I have to tell you something funny.
You didn't interrupt the guest, but you did interrupt me.
That's okay.
Okay.
You didn't hear this. I said that once, that Donna reminds me of myself, minus the crime. Like I like to run the show too, but we felt that she was like the pathological causing factor. I felt, not me. I felt that she was like, she kind of really was the one. And
Terri, do you think she's, as the matriarch of the family, you think she's the one that's sort of behind all of the shot calling here?
Well, she certainly is the one who is behind covering up and protecting her family. She is the matriarch. She is going to make sure that no one goes down. I think she is covering up information, and I think she'll be the last one they go after because she's very good at it. I don't think that we've really heard. She did. I think there was one conversation, and Judy, maybe you can help me out here. I think there was one conversation where she said something to Charlie about watching a podcast, not your podcast, but maybe it was making sure that Charlie heard everything and they could put holes in it. And, Charlie didn't say anything in response to that. But I think she's the one who is making sure that they dot their I's, cross their T's, that they don't fall into some sort of trap. I don't know. And I don't think, and I've followed this case as well, I don't think that she was involved in the beginning, but she certainly, as soon as it happened, put her wagons in order and has helped them to cover up since the crime. Judy, I'm curious, Judy, what are your thoughts on that?
Oh, I feel like Donna is probably the next to be arrested. And I think she was totally one of the main planners of this, especially after reading some of those horrible emails where she was ranting and raving about Dan and telling Wendy what to do and plotting every little step so carefully. She seems like she is kind of a neurotic control freak who really, really hated Dan and was suffering great anxiety, so much to the point where she had to take medication. So I don't really see Donna as just someone that's helping to cover up the mess. I think she was one of the prime instigators.
Joel, can I ask one other question? If you had to say who you thought had the idea first, would it be Charlie, would it be Wendy, or would it be Donna or Harvey? Who had the idea first to say, let's just kill Dan?
You're asking me?
I'm asking anybody. I was asking Judy, but I would love to hear your thoughts on that as well, because I do vacillate. I mean, Donna's not a good person, but I thought the answer to that would have been Wendy, but it sounds like you think the answer to that might be Donna even.
Judy, why don't you go first and then I'll go second?
I would say either Donna or Charlie or to both of them, because the two of them seem very, very intertwined, especially when you hear all those FBI wiretap phone calls between Charlie and his mother. The two of them both seem very conniving and very similar in their personalities.
I agree with you.
As the youngest child, I can, I think what happened here, and this is pure speculation, this is not bound in fact in any way, but I think that Wendy knew whose buttons to press and how, and I think she triggered her mother by endlessly complaining about Dan, and that set off a series of events. But I think that ultimately Wendy was this is a bad pun or phrase, but she was kind of the trigger woman in this that set the events in motion.
That's my thought too, but I think you all have followed it. Look, they are all.
No, I think that it was the Dana. Even though I'm the equivalent of Dana, I still think because she was obsessed with the notion of Wendy moving to South Florida. Right. She offered money. She threatened to convert the children.
It's funny, you see it from your perspective, so you say Donna. I see it from the youngest perspective, so I say Wendy. Judy is impartial, and you're impartial, Terry. But Go ahead, Karm.
No, but I think for us, it's a little bit more dangerous because culturally, we are a little bit closer. And so our identification, like I couldn't listen to dialogues between, let's say, Charlie and Dana because they reminded me a lot of the dialogues between Joel and me without the murder. You see what I mean? Culturally, the way we discuss things.
Yeah.
In detail, like pathologically close.
So we learned some stuff today. Karm, I always appreciate your commentary, but I want to get some other stuff done before the end of this podcast, and time is of the essence.
Yeah,
so
Judy has to go.
We learned some new information today about Charlie. He went from a life of fast cars and boats and allegedly cocaine usage to being, we learned today, in protective custody. Daniel Rashbaum, his defense attorney, explained that he must be in solitary confinement because Department of Corrections believes that is the only way he can stay safe because of the extent of how high profile this case is. He's only getting 30 minutes outside his cell a day, which is probably why he looks super pasty. They said on the weekends, no yard time. At one point, Daniel Rashbaum, I thought this was a bit of a faux pas on his part, started saying how expensive the calls were from jail, how they were adding up for poor Charlie Adelson. I don't think the optics on that were very good, but the point he was making is he's trying to show him and let him hear a lot of evidence, so he's got to spend time on calls. And also, Rashbaum, the defense attorney, says he cannot get a computer into the jail to show evidence to Charlie, and that he had called the warden 36 times, not the warden, but whoever runs the jail, 36 times, and got one response to say, I'll call you back. And on top of that, Rashbaum says there are 57,000 documents that were presented in this case. Terry, just that number alone, 57,000 documents, is that incredibly unusual, or is that a normal number for a murder trial?
I think when you have recordings and, they have recordings, they do add up. I mean, just think about how many calls were made and you have a recording. The documentation becomes what seems to us as excessive, but that's quite normal. I do think that it was a decent argument that he made because the judge at the end really, I thought, was very gracious in saying, I will help you and assist you with all of the difficulties that you are having. Maybe that one comment, Joel, about the money is adding up wasn't very influential for the judge, but it did make it seem as though, to me, the judge wanted to help as far as making contact. He said that, he was available anytime, that he would help them, get some privacy in terms of getting contact with his client. And so I do think he will put things in motion. I do think he's going to help. He told the attorney that he ought to draft up a motion to talk about the difficulty that the defendant is having, the difficulty that he is having, actually, in terms of reaching his client. And so all in all, I thought that argument went well. And he said he didn't even need to have an oral argument on the issue, which leads me to believe that the prosecution isn't going to object. I mean, you have to have representation. There's a constitutional right to have that representation, and getting access to your client, making sure the client can see all the documents, all of that is part of the representation. And they do want him to have good representation. The last thing you want is to have any grounds for appeal here. So I think we'll see at the end of the day that some of that is going to be made a little bit easier for the defendant and for his counsel to work together.
But Rashbaum did say that it could delay the case, which was supposed to start January to March sometime, but he implied that it's going to start later. Karm, what were you going to say?
No, I was going to ask the two attorneys sitting there. I was going to ask something, and I agree with you. It's kind of a silly question, but I'm curious. When I watch detective stories, I call them detectives. The two people who are involved in a crime, they say, "Let's take a walk," and they take a walk and they discuss the illegal things. I never saw anybody in Charlie's family say, "Let's take a walk," where they couldn't be. We couldn't hear what they were talking about.
No, actually, they were seen. They were seen somewhere near a pool having a family huddle, but the FBI agents were not able to get close enough to figure out what was being said. So I also recall maybe there was a walk between Harvey and Charlie somewhere outside, but again, no audio could be picked up. So
I guess that's
there were meetings.
It's a compliment to the feds who've been
so
on
wait
top
a second.
of it.
Wait a second. Does this mean like they are? Let's say they are taking. Let's say they are going down to the boardwalk, okay, on South Beach, and does it mean an agent will follow them and then have the sounds picked up?
Terri, how does the surveillance work? Carmela's obviously asking. And again, it goes to the point that, I mean, if investigators are good at what they do, we don't know a lot of these answers, right? But
And frankly, the investigators, the FBI, they don't want you to know all of their tactics to get the information. I mean, at the end of the day, when they're trying to admit it into court, it does come out. They have to, explain the foundation and custody and control if there is a tape, et cetera. But yeah, they'll follow people. They'll pick up trash to see if anything was thrown out. They'll put, body cams so that it can tape if they are following someone. They will do anything, particularly when they know that there is someone who was involved in a crime and that person has gotten away with it and they need that evidence. So, I think there's a fine line between investigating and entrapment. You want to be careful. Actually, when, the agent handed the envelope, I guess to Wendy it was. And it was Donna. Okay,
Donna.
That was Donna.
Yeah, paper.
That piece of paper to Donna. So yeah, it was Donna, the mother, saying that, you are going to have to pay off, I guess, Rivera's family because, the kids are all poor. And I guess that's what triggered the whole thing about you're going to get all these other thugs coming for money. And Judy, you're right. That makes her a bad person because she really started making all these phone calls. Some people could say that's entrapment. I don't think they'd win on that argument, but it is a fine line between following someone, investigating someone, and actually entrapping them or causing them to commit a crime. And I don't think they would win that argument, but they're doing what they can to get them.
And Terri, of course, is talking about the infamous bump that's become a crux of the case. If you guys would just indulge me for a couple of viewer questions, because we have a great audience and they always have good questions. So this is from Jason, and he says, normally I would cut out the first part of this, but he says, outstanding guests and another powerhouse discussion. Joel and Karm, you've been simply terrific with your content on this case. I could not leave that part out. But then he goes on to say, thanks, Jason. Would it be possible to charge Wendy with a lesser offense, such as accessory after the fact? Sure, it's not first degree, which is more fitting, but that also has serious teeth and would effectively wreck her. So many great points were discussed. It goes on and on. But what about that, Terri? Is that an option at this point?
It is. It's an option. I mean, most prosecutors are going to start from the top and, work their way down if the evidence doesn't show beyond a reasonable doubt that in fact it is the higher crime of the murder or the conspiracy to commit murder or accessory after the fact. So I think it is possible if they don't have any evidence and they want to get her on something, on anything, they could make the determination, look, we don't want to have the jury think we're just reaching for the stars and become not credible. And if all they have is accessory after the fact, I think they'll go after her. In my mind, whether Donna or Wendy or Charlie were the first ones to say it, Wendy is the wife. And to me, you have to get her at some point on anything. So if I were the prosecution, I would make sure I get all of the information I could, pick the crime that's going to stick, and go after that. So it's possible they could get her for just that. But, chances are they'll go for everything.
And then Judy and Terri, for you, this is from Dina. It's possible Charlie Adelson might make a deal to save Wendy. It might mean he'd have to give up Donna in addition to his plea to a lengthy prison sentence. But doing so would keep Wendy out of prison and spare his nephews the loss of both parents. How likely is that such a deal could be struck? Terri?
Wow, throwing your mother under the bus for your sister. Ooh, that's a hard choice.
I wouldn't do that.
Thank you.
I mean, anything is possible. Anything is possible. You don't want children to go without a mom. But I don't think that deal is going to happen. I don't think we're going to see. I mean, back to Judy's point about Charlie and Donna really being the two behind this, I don't think we're going to see Charlie throw his mother under the bus. It could be thrown out there, but I don't think he'd take that deal. I don't know. Judy, what do you think?
Yeah, I totally agree. This guy doesn't really care about his nephews. I mean, just listening to those FBI wiretaps where he keeps talking to Donna and the kids are in the background on the swing set or playing around and stuff. He doesn't care about his nephews. He never asks how the kids are doing or wants to talk to the boys. So I really doubt that he would think, oh, gosh, those boys still need their mom to be there. So let me throw my beautiful, wonderful mommy who loves me so, under the bus to save Wendy. We've heard him griping about Wendy and seeming jealous of her. So, yeah, I don't see that happening where he's going to point the finger at his own mom.
And speaking of the two boys, I had the honor of reading before publication the book of Ruth Markel, the grandmother, and I couldn't put it down, but
it's called The Unveiling, by the way, coming out the end of September. The Unveiling by Ruth Markel.
It's really well written. She knows how to write also.
Hope she knows how to read too.
Yeah. But the sad thing is that it's not a secret because it's in the book, but it really, really destroyed her to the grandmother. And I'm a grandmother, and I have a lot of empathy for her. She even developed a certain heart condition that's I Googled it, and it's related to stress, and it's related to the unbelievably long-term stress that she's living with. So we forget that the victims are still there, and the boys will have major psychological problems for life, or hopefully will get over it at a certain time. The two sons of
the kids are really the ultimate victims in all this. Karm, as you were stuttering and stammering through that last response.
Thank you.
Angela writes, "It's okay, Karm. I have senior moments all the time mid-sentence. Drives my husband crazy, but what power we have, eh?"
Somebody wrote it on the response.
That was Angela. She must be Canadian because she ended in A. Terri, when Katie Magbanua was on the stand on the second trial, she was asked if she believed if Charlie Adelson was involved. And then Katie Magbanua says, after seeing everything I've seen in this trial, meaning her second trial, yes, he is involved. This comes from Muttless Love. What do you make of that?
I actually saw it when she said it, and it surprised me. I mean, considering the fact she dated Charlie at some point, and you heard Kappelman say that today, that there's so much evidence against Charlie, including testimony, and she raised the issue of testimony from McBenoit that she said she thought he was involved. And I believe Kappelman also said that Wendy testified something similar, that, he may have been involved. So I actually was surprised when I heard McBenoit say that on the stand. But look, she was trying to save herself. And when you're on that witness stand and it could be used against you, you are definitely saying and doing everything you possibly can to protect yourself. So maybe I shouldn't be so surprised, but it was good evidence for her to introduce that today to this judge. And it did show in part that, in fact, they have insurmountable evidence against Charlie. And that's one of the prongs to make sure that bond is not granted, that you have the evidence against the individual, that he could be a possible flight risk or a risk to the community. And the fact that McBenoit, who now has been convicted, along with Garcia and Rivera, all of that shows that, in fact, Charlie is involved.
A couple more quick comments and we're done. This one comes from Tori Sapa, MD. Not a lawyer, but a doctor. And this is the great Judy Tseng had me on her YouTube channel just this past week to read Wendy's deposition. And this question revolves around that. And it goes as follows. If you read Wendy's deposition, she asserted, in quotes, her right not to answer almost every question. That raises so many questions. Judy, we read the deposition, but we didn't really talk about it. What about the fact, and you played Wendy as we read this deposition, what about the fact that you asserted so many times? What does that mean?
Well, I think that definitely challenges what Wendy said in court, which was that she had been nothing but helpful. So this was a deposition in the case regarding Sigfredo Garcia and Catherine McBenoit. So if she really had no involvement, she had no idea that Dan was going to be murdered, or she really has no idea who did the crime, then why wouldn't you want to help law enforcement, give whatever information you actually have to try to solve the crime, figure out who murdered your children's father? I mean, I remember reading in multiple places that she thought he was a good father, or supposedly, the kids loved him. He was a good dad. She didn't like him, but I never heard anything about him being a horrible father. So it just is kind of mind-boggling that, if you had nothing to do with the murder of your own ex-husband, then why are you asserting and refusing to answer so many questions, many of which seem pretty innocuous?
And Terri,
did you know Sigfredo Garcia? Did you know Luis Rivera?
For those who are not attorneys, what is the difference between taking the fifth and asserting, Terri?
It's the same. She's asserting the fifth. She's taking the fifth. She's not going to say anything. She has the right under the Fifth Amendment not to incriminate herself in a criminal trial. And that's exactly what she did. But I agree 100% with Judy. If she's not involved, if Charlie, and she are not involved with the death of Dan Markel, why isn't she saying more? Why is she taking the fifth on all of these questions? What is it that she had to hide? And so I definitely think you can imply from that there's a problem, that she's guilty, that she is hiding something. So she has the right, but frankly, you can't help but think there's something behind all of that.
Tiger Lily, we're going to combine two quick comments. Says, prediction, this is from Tiger Lily, Chucky will flip on Wendy to save him some jail time and save Donna from all jail time before he goes to trial. His tolerance for jail will be already waning by then. And then a follow-up comment from Seljack. Personally, I would like to see Wendy behind bars more than anyone else. It would be punishment enough for Adelson's parents to be shunned from their stuffy elitist community, and icing on the cake to have their darling Wendy behind bars. So, Terri, to you once again, does Wendy eventually end up, does Seljack get their wish? Does Wendy eventually end up behind bars? And does Chucky flip?
Well, if Chucky flips, it will be against Wendy. As we said, we don't think he's going to flip against his mom. So that's a possibility. They don't have the best of relationships. And I could see trying to reach some sort of plea agreement where he throws her under the bus. But again, I don't see him throwing his own mom under the bus. But Wendy's a possibility, and she is the linchpin, in my opinion. She's the one who is behind, she was the wife.
A final comment from Daphne O. And it goes as follows. Karm needs her own show. She's the star.
Wow, I swear I never heard this one. Where
Daphne O.
I want this framed.
Daphne O. It will be framed.
Okay.
Wow, what a day. Judy, you first. Any final takeaways from this Arthur hearing and what we're expecting, what you're expecting next?
Okay. Well, the judge did say there's going to be a case management hearing in December. And I mean, what I took away from today is, was it you, Terri, who said everybody seems so professional? Like the attorneys seemed respectful of each other. The judge seemed to respect Daniel Rashbaum and wanted to do what he could to make sure that Charlie could communicate with his attorneys and have access to the evidence and everything. So I'm impressed by the professionalism of everybody. And I thought Daniel Rashbaum did a pretty good job. I wouldn't be making fun of him or whatever. He seems like a very competent attorney. He made some arguments that sounded pretty good. And, unfortunately, it looks like there is a mountain of evidence against Charlie. And I was also very happy to hear that the prosecution has other evidence out there, like iPhone records and things we haven't even heard about.
Terri, your final takeaway?
Well, I think the Arthur hearing went well. I think the judge made the correct decision. I don't think Charlie Adelson should be out on bond, whether he tries to escape or not. In my humble opinion, the crime that he committed or allegedly committed was so heinous, and there's so much evidence that he should stay behind bars. And so ultimately, I do think that the hearing came out the right way. I also think that the trial is going to be expeditious. I think the judge is going to make swift rulings. I think the judge is going to be fair. Like we said, he is definitely running a courtroom where everybody is extremely professional, and that's going to help the case move along when you don't have attorneys arguing back and forth and trying to do something as far as cameras or reporters are concerned, and they're just trying to move the case along. I think we're going to see that it does move along. And finally, I think a jury in this case is going to get the evidence admitted that should be admitted and excluded that should be excluded. And if they are able to select a good jury, I think at the end of the day, we're going to have the right result. And based on what I've heard so far and the evidence against Charlie Adelson, I think the right result will probably be a conviction.
And when you say expeditious for a murder trial that's as high profile as this, are we talking 2 months, 3 months?
Well, as Judy mentioned, the case management hearing, I think it's in December, and the judge did mention a March, April, May date. And I think that was for the trial, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
And so it's going to take a little bit of time. But, with COVID and with all of the trials that have been backed up, I think that probably makes sense. I think we'll see a resolution, 6-week trial, maybe max, maybe less. But I think come May, June, this trial will be finished as far as I'm concerned, as far as what I've seen so far.
Well, this was awesome. Judy Tseng, thank you so much. Asian American Legal Focus. She is the person to go to on YouTube, and besides us, of course. And we've got Terri Austin, whose name I will never forget because playing tennis as a kid, it was Tracy Austin that I used to watch all the time. And Terri, for you, you are a host and legal analyst at the Law and Crime Network. Any other plugs for you that we can offer up?
Well, if you need commentary, give me a buzz. I guess I'm at Terri D. Austin is my Twitter. My Instagram. You can tell social media is not my forte, but I'm pretty sure that's my handle.
I tagged you on Instagram the other day, and I'm just learning Instagram myself. But we would love to have you back on. Tell Dan Abrams I am thrilled for his success. Could not be happier. And that I send all my love. All right. Karm, any final words? This is usually where Karm takes over the show. Any final words, Karm?
I have a long thing, but I don't want to get it. It's related. I have to tell you, it's kind of cute. It's a cute story. You you don't remember O.J. Simpson because you're too young. But
No, I do.
I was riveted. And they had the dream team.
Are you talking about the trial? I remember the trial.
Wait
very
one
well.
second. Wait a second. So now they were.
Karm, by the way, when he said this is the part of the show where you should take, I wasn't literal to keep going here. Everyone wants to leave. Make this quick.
No, but
O.J. Simpson, go on.
O.J. Simpson. So they had the dream team, and he was acquitted because the glove didn't fit. And they had very, 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 very clever attorneys. Now, they said that Charlie has a dream team. And I was like really scared of a deja vu that we saw with O.J. Simpson, that he will also have a dream team. And I was absolutely relieved this guy that was there today, who is the main attorney.
So you're underwhelmed is what you're saying.
No, I'm whelmed.
You're whelmed. You're not overwhelmed and you're not underwhelmed. She's just whelmed, everybody. Once again, Karm makes the show go an extra 10 minutes. And
I always do that. I can't resist.
Love you, America. We'll see you next time.